Okay, so first of all, thanks again for sending this over, these Tesla delivery numbers.
Yeah.
And some of the reactions to them. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah. It is pretty wild what's going on.
So we should unpack this whole thing. For everyone listening, you've probably seen the headlines. Tesla's first quarter deliveries. They came in just under 336,700 electric vehicles. Look, I know you follow all this closely, so you already know what that means. It's a big miss. It's a serious drop. So today we're going to try to really dig into this news, really figure out, what it all means for Tesla and, frankly, what it means for the entire EV market, where things might be headed.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people are wondering that right now.
We've got the hard numbers, we've got the delivery data, and we've got some pretty strong opinions from the analysts who cover this stuff. So let's dive in.
Sounds good.
The top line number is definitely eye-catching. But for me, the thing that really jumps out is that figure represents a 13% drop in deliveries compared to the same time last year.
Yeah, that's definitely the headline for a lot of people, I think.
And that's not just a little dip. It actually marks the worst quarter for Tesla since early 2022. So right away, alarm bells start going off. What's happening here?
Yeah, it's definitely a shift. And I think people are right to be paying attention to this.
And that's reflected in some of the reactions from analysts. I mean, we're seeing some pretty strong words being used, like Dan Ives over at Wedbush. He's been a Tesla bull for a long time. Yeah. But even he's calling these numbers a disaster on every metric. And he even went as far as to say that this is a fork in the road moment for Elon Musk. I mean, that's not the kind of language you typically hear, especially from someone who's been so positive on Tesla in the past.
No, you don't. It does suggest that something pretty significant is going on. I mean, to have someone like that who's, historically been a cheerleader for the company come out and use that kind of language. Definitely. Yeah. It makes you take notice and wonder, what's really behind all this.
And then you've got Ross Gerber, who's an investment advisor. He went on X, and he really didn't hold back either. And he made a point that I think is worth highlighting. He pointed out that deliveries of Tesla's higher-end models, so we're talking the Cybertruck, the Model S, the Model X, those deliveries fell by 25%, down to just under 13,000 vehicles. And Gerber's conclusion from all this was that the high-end EV business has totally eroded.
Wow.
And he even said
that
Cybertruck is basically not selling. And maybe the most striking thing, he said that the brand is broken and may not be fixable. So that's a pretty bleak assessment, I would say.
It's very pessimistic. And it raises some really interesting questions. I mean, first of all, about the strength of Tesla's premium offerings.
Right, are people still as excited about these high-end models as they used to be? And I think, Gerber's comments kind of tap into a broader anxiety, maybe. Yeah. That's starting to emerge about Tesla's overall brand image. Whether that's taken a hit in recent times. Yeah. And to your point about Lerdo, these higher-end models and their importance to Tesla, I mean, if you think about it, those are the vehicles that carry the highest profit margins. So if they're seeing a significant drop in sales of those models, that's going to put a lot of pressure on their profitability. And it kind of feeds into this larger question of whether this is just a blip, a temporary thing.
Or if it's something more
fundamental and more concerning for Tesla's long-term outlook.
Right, exactly. And that's, I think, what everyone is trying to figure out right now.
So now let's bring in Tesla's perspective. What are they saying about all of this?
Well, they have offered an explanation for these lower delivery numbers. They're saying it's mainly due to changes they've made to their production lines as they gear up for the launch of the new Model Y.
Right.
On the surface, that sounds like a fairly standard reason for a company to maybe see a little dip in output. You're retooling your factories, you're adjusting things. There's going to be some disruption.
Yeah, that makes sense. But the scale of this decrease, 13% overall.
Plus those really steep drops we're seeing in specific markets. You have to wonder, is that really the whole story?
Right. Yeah, it does seem like there might be more to it than just, some temporary production hiccups.
Yeah.
And I think one way to kind of explore that is to look at what's happening with demand more broadly.
Right.
Like, is there any evidence that demand for Teslas is actually weakening?
And the answer to that seems to be yes, we're seeing it in the monthly sales figures.
Yeah.
Coming out of different countries. And they paint a pretty concerning picture. For example, in February, Tesla sales in Australia and Germany both plunged by over 70% compared to the previous year.
Wow, 70%. That's a huge drop.
It is. I mean, that's a massive contraction. And it wasn't just those two countries. We also saw declines in other markets like Norway, Denmark, Sweden, France. So this isn't just, an isolated issue. It really does seem like there's a broader trend here of softening demand for Tesla vehicles. Yeah, that's a really important point. I mean, it really does suggest that we're looking at something more widespread than just, a problem in one particular region or a couple of markets. And to your point, I mean, Germany in particular is a huge car market globally. So to see a 70% drop there, that's a really big deal. And it suggests that there are, potentially some pretty significant factors at play, whether it's, increased competition, changes in consumer preferences, who knows. But something is definitely happening there that's worth paying attention to.
And it doesn't stop there. Even in their two biggest markets, China and the US, Tesla sales have been trending downwards. In China specifically. In March, they sold about 79,000 vehicles, which is an 11.5% decline compared to the same month last year.
So not quite as dramatic as some of these other markets, but still, a noticeable decrease.
Right. And the point here is that China and the U.S., these are the volume markets for Tesla. These are the places where they really make the bulk of their sales. So to see a slowdown in both of those markets simultaneously, I mean, that's going to have a real impact on their bottom line.
Absolutely. And it suggests that there might be some broader trends at play that are affecting the entire EV market. Maybe it's, economic conditions, maybe it's something else. But it's not just Tesla that's feeling the pinch.
Right. It kind of makes you wonder, are we starting to see the initial, super high growth phase of the EV market? Maybe that's starting to taper off a little bit as things mature and as more competitors enter the space.
That's a great question. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the coming months and years.
So this is where things get a little more complicated, I think, and potentially a bit more sensitive, because we have to talk about this growing movement to boycott Tesla, which seems to be directly tied to Elon Musk's increasingly prominent political views and involvement. The stated goals of this boycott are pretty straightforward. They're calling for current Tesla owners to sell their cars, for potential buyers to steer clear, and for investors to divest from Tesla stock. And we've even seen some pretty disturbing reports of vandalism targeting Tesla dealerships and even individual owners. I mean, we're talking things like arson, even gunfire in some cases. It's a really charged atmosphere right now.
Wow, it is. It's pretty striking. And it raises this question of how a company's brand can become so inextricably linked to its leader, and how factors that are external to the product itself can really influence how people feel about the company and ultimately whether they're willing to buy their products.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's hard to measure the exact impact of a boycott like this on sales figures. But these reports of vandalism and the stated intentions of some owners to sell their cars because of these political reasons, it does suggest that it's it could be a contributing factor to this weakening demand we're seeing.
Right. I mean, it's definitely something that Tesla needs to be aware of and to try to manage, because if they're if they're starting to lose customers because of issues related to the CEO's personal views or political activities, that's a problem.
And I think what's really interesting here is to look at the reactions from Tesla owners themselves, because it's quite divided. Yeah, you have some owners who have actually said that. The criticism, the backlash. Yeah. It's actually strengthened their support for the company and for Musk. It's like they're doubling down. They see themselves as part of this counter movement. But then you have another group of owners who are saying, you know what, I'm actually considering selling my car.
Wow.
Either because they're afraid of, being targeted, or simply because they just don't feel comfortable being associated with the brand anymore. Yeah. So it's really creating this rift within the Tesla community.
That's so interesting. I mean, it shows you just how much personal identity can be tied up in what kind of car you drive, and how these external factors, these non-product related factors, can really sway people's choices and their brand loyalty, I guess.
Absolutely. And then to add to all of this, we're also seeing some pretty interesting developments in the used Tesla market. There's been a surge in listings, about 33% so far this year.
Wow.
And now listings for other used EVs have also gone up, but not quite as much, about 27%. So the question is, why is this happening? And there are a couple of theories out there. Some people are saying, look, it's just a matter of more Teslas reaching an age where owners are naturally starting to trade them in. But others are suggesting that, Musk's influence, his actions, his statements might actually be playing a role in driving up the supply of used Teslas.
It's interesting. It does make you wonder, if there is a connection there. Like, are some people who might have held on to their Teslas for longer, maybe they're now deciding to
get rid of them
because they're, happy with Musk or with the direction of the company.
Right. It's really hard to say for sure, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
So, taking a step back, looking at the big picture, it's pretty clear that Tesla, along with other EV makers, is facing a bit of a slowdown in the electric vehicle market. After years of just explosive growth, things are starting to level off a bit.
Right.
And these latest delivery numbers really confirm that. In fact, Tesla saw its first year-over-year sales decline in 2024.
Oh, wow.
And they've said publicly that they're aiming to return to growth in 2025.
Right.
But these figures definitely raise some doubts about whether that's achievable. I mean, even Gene Munster, who's a pretty well-known analyst, he's revised his delivery forecast for this year down to 1.63 million vehicles, which would be a 9% drop compared to last year. And keep in mind, that's already a downward revision from his earlier prediction, which was also forecasting a decline.
Okay, so even the analysts who are, paid to be optimistic are starting to get a little more pessimistic.
Exactly. And that just shows you how seriously people are taking this situation.
Right.
And there are a couple of key dates to watch here. Coming up in June, Tesla has sort of a self-imposed deadline for two big initiatives. One is they're still planning to start production of a more affordable Tesla sometime in the first half of 2025.
Yeah.
And the second is they're also planning to launch their robotaxi service in Texas in June, which is widely seen as a sort of a first step towards their grand vision of a fully autonomous cybercab. And what's interesting here is that Tom Narayan, who's an analyst over at RBC Capital Markets, he's suggested that potential Tesla buyers might actually be holding off on buying current models, because they're waiting for this more affordable option to become available.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you know that there's a cheaper model coming out soon, why rush out and buy one now?
So,
especially with, technology evolving so quickly, you might want to wait for the latest and greatest.
Exactly. And this really highlights the challenge that Tesla faces.
Right.
Because on the one hand, announcing plans for a more affordable model, that can generate excitement, create buzz, attract new customers. But it also risks cannibalizing your existing sales.
Yeah.
Because people might say, you know what, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait for that cheaper model.
Yeah. It's a tough balancing act for sure.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so these next few months leading up to June, they're going to be really critical for Tesla as they try to, navigate all of this.
Yeah.
And figure out how to regain some momentum.
It is. And it'll be really interesting to see how they handle it.
And just to add some context here, it's important to remember that Tesla isn't the only EV maker facing challenges right now. Rivian, which is another electric vehicle company, they recently reported a 36% drop in their first quarter deliveries.
Wow. Okay.
And they specifically pointed to a challenging demand environment. And they even attributed some of that to the impact of those wildfires in Los Angeles. So it does seem like there are broader factors at play here that are affecting the entire EV market.
Yeah, that's a really important point. I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the Tesla specific drama, but it's important to remember that this is a new industry. It's still evolving, and there are going to be ups and downs along the way.
Right, and so maybe this is just a natural part of that process.
That's it.
Bringing it all together for you, the main takeaway here is this: Tesla's latest delivery numbers, they were way below expectations. And that points to some pretty serious challenges that the company's grappling with right now, whether it's production changes, softening demand, negative brand perception. It's probably a combination of all of those things.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
And for you listening, I think the question is this a temporary setback for Tesla? Just a bump in the road as they transition to new models and figure out how to deal with this evolving market? Or is it something more fundamental? Is this a sign that the tide is turning for the EV market and maybe for Tesla's dominant position within it?
Yeah, that's the big question. And I don't think anyone knows the answer for sure.
Right. It's definitely a situation worth watching close.
For sure.
So, on that note, here's a final thought for you to ponder. Given everything we've talked about, the disappointing delivery numbers, the analysts' concerns, Tesla's plans for a more affordable model, their ambitions with the robotaxi service. What do you think?
What do you think the near future holds? For Tesla, can they achieve their goals? Or they're headed for more turbulence?
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out.
It definitely is. Okay, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into the world of electric vehicles and all the latest developments.